I'm a huge fan of Automation Hour. I love that you guys are promoting flow and visual programming because I think it's an easy and awesome way to do some pretty powerful things in the Salesforce org. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem since 2004 and an MVP since 2012, and I presented my first Dreamforce session on flow that I ever did was in 2013, I think, maybe 2014. So long-time fan of it. I think it's an awesome tool to have in our tool belts, and I am 15 times certified, including system architect and application architect. You can find my blog at www.snugsfbay.com and my GitHub account, where I've posted some preliminary information about the presentation I'm doing here today. And I will be updating that with the code samples from today. I am also a huge Trailhead fan. I have over 530 badges now, I think. And you can find me on Twitter at SnugSFBay. Way back when, that stood for Salesforce Nonprofit User Group San Francisco Bay Area, but now it's really just me. So I hope that you will follow me on Twitter and check out the GitHub repository for ongoing information about this presentation. So today I want to talk to you about using NextBest Action as a replacement for JavaScript buttons, because we all know that we love flow, we love the visual programming, and NextBest Action takes that to the next level. Lightning is here for us all now, and JavaScript buttons are going away for good. We need a good solution, though, to take their place. But let's talk about what JavaScript buttons are good for, or were good for when we could use them. They were really good for validating data before allowing an action to take place. So if you wanted to send a user to a particular website, for example, only if the data on a particular record warranted that type of action, you could validate that the data contained, the fields contained the data that you wanted them to. You could even allow for user input to modify that data. There could be confirmation and error pop-up messages. In my experience, those were usually error messages, but okay. And of course, you could create records with pre-populated fields. That's always popular, right? We all want to be able to do that and make life easier for our users as a result. And you could use a JavaScript button to redirect a user to a page within Salesforce or a page outside of Salesforce. You could even use JavaScript buttons to make an API call. Awesome and powerful things. They required a developer, probably because JavaScript, you know, but there could be an alternative. NextBest Actions. And I'm gonna think that maybe, well, NextBest Actions can do everything in that left-hand column that JavaScript buttons could do. They're also better because they're primarily clicks, not code. So they're easier to maintain by a wider variety of individuals. They make the whole user experience more user-centric because they take a carrot rather than a stick approach to the user experience, rather than here's a button, press it and find out that it's not valid right now. You can only surface the buttons and information and options that make sense at a given point in time for a user. NextBest Actions are really cool because they can call flows. And as you all probably already know, flows are super powerful and let you do super interactions with users that are great for creating records and manipulating data. And oh yeah, NextBest Actions can call Apex also. We love Apex. Apex is the foundation of backend programming on the Salesforce platform. So we probably have a lot of Apex already there and ready for us to use. Next best actions are also awesome because they're reusable and modular. And if you're redoing your JavaScript buttons and looking at how many you have and wondering why you have so many, think about how you can take reusable modular components and reduce the workload and the maintenance load of all of that functionality. Also, next best actions are, well, somewhat testable because, of course, they call flow, and we can do some testing with flow. But they also have a test option on their own, so that's kind of cool. It's a little bit limited to interactive testings, more like a debugger, but it's something. For an overview of what next best action is and how it relates to flows, I want to explain the 3 parts that make up a next best action. First, there's a strategy, and that's the sort of object-centric information that you create with logic diagrams. So on the far left of my slide here, it shows that I'm loading a shipping strategy, and that just goes to output. The output of that strategy is some recommendation for the users. Now, recommendations are simply records that link strategies to some outcome. For me, that outcome is almost always going to be a flow because that's what I like. You can also create quick actions that connect to your recommendations. So if you're really great at JavaScript programming and you love Lightning components, Lightning Web components, Aura components, Lightning Web components aren't easily put into quick actions yet. So let's shift to Aura components. If you love Aura components, then maybe you skip the flows at the end, but I love the visual programming options. Flows are pretty to look at. Flow fancy, I like it. There's an example of a flow that is connected to a recommendation, and that recommendation is loaded by my strategy. But let me give you a quick look at what this means for the end user. I've taken 3 different Trailhead modules and I've meshed them all together to create this demo for you in my new made-up business use case, which is, what if I ran a petting zoo? And if I ran a Trailhead petting zoo specifically, so all of our characters from Trailhead, maybe Cody, maybe Erna Badger, isn't it Erna? I've forgotten the name of the badger. Somebody will tell me, I'm sure. Somebody out there knows. So if I ran that Trailhead petting zoo, I wanted to imagine what the user experience for coordinating with customers might be. And in this case, I've created an opportunity to work with the Boy Scouts of the Southwest. They can invite animals to come to one of their meetings. The amount here is actually based on a different Trailhead module. As I mentioned, I've mashed several together, so ignore the prices. But when you see the demo, maybe it would be that much. We'll see. Okay, so I've got this opportunity to work with them, and what I need to do to move it from prospecting to qualifications is confirm their location and confirm my contact. So I've got this next best action here that lets me confirm that the data is true. When I click that, accepting that action, it pops up and surfaces the street address. I did a quick and dirty solution here. I didn't worry about making it pretty. So this is actually using a record collection set to surface the address from my account data. And it's using a record collection set to surface my opportunity contact role information. So as the person in charge of moving this opportunity forward, I would get this screen, hopefully give them a call and say, hey, I'm trying to verify that Delaney Boyd is interested in this petting zoo. And if some of my information is wrong, my flow can direct me to some more complex process of getting the correct data into the system. But for demonstration purposes today, I'm just going to go ahead and mark that as all being correct. And Delaney's the right person. I'm now on that contact page. Hopefully I'm talking to Delaney on the phone right now, and we're going to think about which animals they would like to have appear at their next Boy Scout meeting. And the choices here are Majestic Badger, Fluffy Bunny, Scary Bear, and Pet Chicken. If you've done the Trailhead on REST APIs, then you might recognize those animals from that list. But let's see what happens when Delaney confirms that, hey, Badger, Majestic Badger would be good. That's a great choice. So we got this straight off the API, and that's what they wanted, so we accepted that. We've got Fluffy Bunny, but they're gonna pass on the Fluffy Bunny. Delaney wanted actually the Scary Bear. And, you know, bringing a bear to a Boy Scout meeting could be a dangerous thing. I imagine there might be a lot of governmental agencies that would want to, you know about this happening or give approval. So maybe I've got to go to an outside system and use OAuth to log in and send them information that, hey, we're going to be bringing a bear to a Boy Scout meeting, and it's a scary bear because that's how it's described. So I actually can use this NextBest Action to call an API to get the recommended animals that I can bring to my Boy Scout meeting, and even to go do some specific action based on the fact that one of these is a bear. I can go to a different website navigating outside of Salesforce and cause, you know, additional things to happen. In that case, the bear warning comes from our build a bear, which bear tracking trailhead application. These are all linked on the GitHub page for the NextBest Action presentation. So that kind of shows you the power of NextBest Actions, but let me also dive in and show you really the ease of using it. For this first page, the opportunity page, oh, another little benefit of going through all this is now my opportunity is actually showing as qualified because I confirmed that data. Oh, and now my next best action is gone because the confirmed data action doesn't make any sense anymore. We've moved to qualification. We don't need to confirm the data. The action that was associated with that not presented, user doesn't need it, they can move on to other things. So let's take a quick look at how the page is set up for all of that to happen, because that first demonstration on the opportunity page was a little half and half. It was a little bit next best actions, but it was also taking advantage of the conditional formatting on Lightning pages, which I think is a pretty awesome thing, right? We can actually show this when the record stage is equal to prospecting and not surface it at other times. And we can do that just with the page, right? We don't need extra next best actions to do that. And really the logic of it is all handled by my flow, my validate, contact, and shipping flow. So a lot of what we're doing hasn't yet taken advantage of next best actions. So let's take it a little bit further on our opportunity page and rearrange it. I'm going to go ahead and move this under here just to get it out of the way temporarily. And I've got another version of my next best action down at the bottom of the page. Hoping I can drag that up here. Scrolling and webinars don't go well together. Come on. So I can plot this version. Now this version doesn't take advantage of my conditional formatting on the page. Instead, it takes advantage of the intelligence of NextBest Actions. Let's face it, Einstein's on the NextBest Action for a reason. It's because it gives us a little bit of brains and logic behind all of this. Now let's see what that page looks like. Okay, currently my NextBest Action encourages me to connect with my contact. Now, if I were still in my prospecting, I'm going to back up just to show you how special NextBest Actions are. Just using my new and different NextBest Action, I'm getting confirmed data here when it's in the prospecting stage. That's the action you saw me take before. And then when it moves to the qualifying stage or qualification stage, I get a different option altogether. Do I want to actually connect with Delaney Boyd? Maybe I didn't get an answer previously on what their needs were for the animals. Or maybe I want to confirm that, see if they've gotten the contract, that sort of thing. So maybe I need to go into that. This is the sort of information that you can actually pass from a next best strategy into your flow. You can give it the context record ID. That's the record page on which you're starting. You can give it the recommendation ID. That's the recommendation that connects the strategy to the flow, as you know. And you can also pass in the record ID using the standard record ID field that we often use with flow, just so you know, it's there. But I can also pass in a custom field that I put on my recommendation. This is all getting really complicated, so why don't we take a look at the next best actions and see what they look like a little bit more closely. We started with the pretty simple version, and hopefully I can remember which one was the simple one. And that was just to load that strategy and get us going so that we could get to the flow. For our shipping strategy or our understanding where our petting zoo is going strategy, all we're going to do is bring up the opportunity recommendation and post that on the opportunity page. Let's take a quick look at what recommendations look like. Remember, they're just records in Salesforce. So I can pull one of those up just from my waffle menu. Okay, I just have one recommendation in here. It's my opportunity qualifications recommendation. And all it does is make sure that we validate the shipping address, the address where we're sending those petting zoo animals. And we can take a quick look at that flow and see what that looks like. Validate contact and shipping. It's going to get the opportunity record. It's going to present and surface those record sets for the shipping address and the contact. If everything looks good, then we're going to navigate to our contact using simple flow action here. And if not, then we can go to our update records. And we are updating the opportunity. This one is to update our shipping address and update our opportunity contact record. And this one just updates the stage on my opportunity. So all the heavy hitting is still done in flow. And I can reuse that flow in many different places and resurface it in many different ways, which I love. I love reusability. And the brains behind it is all in my opportunity shipping next best action. Really not much in the brains. So let's look at a different version of this. And that is the one that I've now surfaced on the page. Whoa. Sorry, flipping around a little bit too much here. So our more complex version of the NextBest Action actually generates recommendations on the fly and maps that information from a Salesforce Apex class into recommendations that never actually get saved. So let's take a look at that, because it's where we really get into the power of NextBest Actions. In this case, we're getting the opportunity contact records so that we know which contacts to follow up with. And that's available here in our opportunity contact role strategy Apex class. Like all Apex classes, if they have an invocable method in them, they're only allowed one per class, but that one invocable method lets you have complex logic on the back end that controls the behavior of your flow or next best action or process builder. It's really quite powerful. In this case, we're creating a recommendation, but we're never inserting that into our database. We're just creating it and holding it in memory. And we're passing it all kinds of information, including the opportunity contact role, the actual role of that individual. And if we had more than one contact on our Boy Scout opportunity, this is going to get a whole list of them and present all of those options in my screen. So that takes care of getting us the opportunity contact role data and getting that into our recommendation and building a recommendation that we can actually use. But what's next on our mapping that data? We have to make sure that we get the secondary info into the recommendation, just like all of the default data goes in. The default data being the name of the recommendation, the description, and the actual action that we want it to do. That is all controlled by my Apex class in this case. We've got our name and description, and our action reference is our OCR strategy now. And if we look at our flow, that's a different flow even, because I wanted it just to pop up the options to show us what data we're getting, right? Because this is a slightly different version of my demonstration. So we're surfacing custom data, we're surfacing the standard data that goes on the recommendation, and we're doing all of that with a simple call to an Apex class. And we're also able to load our data validation screen, which contains our opportunity record. Now with the branch selector, we can determine which of those is the right thing to do at any given time. So when I moved the stage back to prospecting, you actually saw the opportunity flow that presented the shipping address and the opportunity contact role individual's name. But once the stage moved up to qualified, you saw the different option. The recommendation, in fact, that doesn't live anywhere in my database because it lives right here inside of my next best action. This is the only place that recommendation lives. It's sort of all held in Einstein's brain, if you will, and all handled by my next best action. I don't need that recommendation to be saved. I need it to be flexible and on the fly and turn up only when it needs to be used. So in this case, if I refresh this screen, Once again, this is the simple second step that got generated automatically and on the fly by NextBest Action. It, of course, could point to any flow that I wanted it to. And so let's take a look at the contacts, because this one that we saw where Delaney was actually choosing from the animal options, this is also NextBest Action recommendations that don't appear in my recommendation list. I literally only have one record for a recommendation here. So how is Delaney getting, well, how am I when I talk to Delaney, how am I getting all of these different recommendations? Well, they're coming from an API call. And again, we're relying on our Apex for that API call. In this case, it's a simple call from animal callouts. It's a Trailhead code that I just am making use of for demonstration purposes and to show you how easy it is to use the Trailhead, to use the Salesforce system. So again, I've added an invocable method. I've given it a label and description so that it's easy to understand when I reference it in my flow, next best action, all of those things. And in this case, it is returning a list of recommendations, a list of recommendations to be more precise. And it's getting that from this API call to a Heroku app from Trailhead. Thank you, Trailhead. And it just surfaces our list of animals. If I were a real petting zoo, maybe my animal care application is on a different system and I need to have an API into it to know which animals are well rested, which ones are available in a particular area, which ones maybe are already off or booked at some other location. So it makes sense to have an API call to surface data. The magic here is that I can take that data, create a recommendation in memory, again, passing it some secondary information. I'm calling it secondary information because then I can reuse, because, you know, I like reusability. I can reuse that field, whether I'm talking about my opportunity contact role or I'm talking about the type of animal that is being reserved here and whether or not there's additional action that needs to take place. For example, putting out the bear warning. That was all based on the secondary info. So why don't we take a look at the strategy for our contact API and see how different that looks. Once again, it's using the generate because we're generating those recommendations on the fly and we're not even saving them to the database. That's how flexible and dynamic they are. We're getting our list of trailhead animals here, and that's all we do. We map that into our recommendation with our additional field of secondary info. And wow, well, let's go back to our Apex code and check what our action reference is. It's looking at the flow called API recommended. These are the things that the API recommended for us. So let's see what those entail. This actually is pretty simple as well. It does a decision. Are there bears involved? If there are, we use Flow to navigate outside of Salesforce to that, again, Heroku application, Trailhead application, to send our bear warning. And if it's any other animal, we can take actions such as reserving the animal. And in this case, all I'm doing is surfacing a screen because this is just a demo, just for fun. Okay, so we have seen a lot of different things here, and it's really quite simple because when we look at it closely, there was a starter next best action that was really just the simple one, showing how to surface and validate some data. There was a more complex strategy that helped us to see what data was available to work with and to see how flexible the next best strategies could be in deciding what recommendations to surface and having branching logic to determine what should be done at which time. And then, of course, on the contact, we also had some recommendations, a strategy for creating recommendations that were all based on Apex code, based on API calls to other systems and bringing data out of those external systems, and based on reaching out to those other systems to do action in those other systems as well. Really, hopefully, you've seen how super powerful and super simple when it comes down to it. Because again, with the Apex, you've probably already got the code there, and you may already be making API calls. You may be already surfacing data with the SOCL statements. So all of this is very similar to things you already are doing. The only addition is creating the list of recommendations, which turns into a list of recommendations, and doing that on the fly. Okay, so back to the slides. That's really all there is to next best actions. And as you've seen, we can use it to validate fields. We get to use flow to complete the missing data. We can use conditional page layouts, or we can use that strategy to define even more complex conditions. Of course, flow interacts with the user so that we can pre-fill values, we can populate and update records. The values can be pre-filled from our strategy using that map element, or it can be pre-filled within the flow if flow wants to go and fetch records from related child records or parent records and really get more complex logic into place. With all of the page layout options that we have with next best actions, users definitely get the confirmation and feedback. And of course, all of it pops up on the screen to show them. It's a very dynamic user interface that responds to what the user needs and what the data has available, what options make sense for a given set of data. Users can accept or refuse the recommendations. They can ignore them and wait until it's more appropriate. And of course, it's really dynamic. So that dynamic nature is the feedback that the users really want. It's, what can I do today? And of course, we saw that we were creating records with those pre-populated fields. Again, using flow to manipulate before creating the records, using strategy to manipulate and pass data into the flow. Pretty awesome stuff. Redirecting to a page, that was really based on flow and a very simple Lightning Aura component, not web component. And we could do that to navigate, for example, to a Visual Force page to give you something like a packing list or an invoice PDF. In this case, I use that redirect to navigate to the contact record once we had moved to the qualified opportunity. And I also use that to navigate to the bear warning application. And of course, you saw that it's awesome for making those API calls. A couple of small changes to my Apex code that I already had from Trailhead in this case enabled me to turn that into an Apex invocable method and work with that data inside of my strategy, passing it into my flow. Hopefully I've made you all converts and made you realize the awesome, awesome power of next best actions and how great it is for replacing JavaScript buttons in a way that gives users a really cool outcome. Follow the GitHub repository so that you can get the code. I'm going to, over the weekend, create a package of all the code that I did for this, and you will be more than welcome to download it from GitHub if you're interested. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to try to answer those and revisit some of this.
Okay. Ooh. Thank you. It was very good sessions. I have a couple of questions for you personally. No one asked any questions, so you can ask a few questions.
Awesome.
I know that next best action is, I don't know, many of the community people in the Salesforce don't know about what is the next best action and how to use it. So how do they learn more? Like if they want to explore more about like next best action, and if someone never used the next best action, so what is your recommendation? How they get started with the next best action?
Well, I am a learn by doing kind of person, so my recommendation is always going to be get in there and try it out. You know, you can hopefully over the weekend download the package that I'm going to put on GitHub and play with it. Check out the next best actions that I've created. They should be packaged up and installable through that. Basically, it'll be a package that you can upload via Workbench using retrieve, deploy, and retrieve, or upload via SFDX. So again, I'm a learn by doing. Take that existing stuff and play with it, and also just dive in and experiment with the different options. The important thing is understanding that next best actions lead to a recommendation. They kind of don't really do anything else. And that recommendation doesn't have to be saved to the database. It can live on in Einstein's memory for that one user, for that one point in time, and it doesn't really exist at any other time. So it's very centered on what that user needs at that moment. So don't go looking for recommendations to be built and created. They're not, unless you build them and create them yourself. And it's a little bit confusing because next best actions is accessed from setup, but recommendations are accessed from the waffle menu, like all the other data tables in Salesforce.
Mm-hmm. And do you need to grant access of this record to any users, or will it automatically work in the system mode?
Well, it goes on the page layout. So if it's something that you've added to the page layout, it shouldn't require any additional permissions. We can double check that. I think the only permissions you need are ability to run flows, and if you're creating them, you need to be able to modify data.
Awesome. Someone is asking for the next best action, how can you track how many actions you completed in a month? I think there is that limit, but he's asking.
Good question. I think it's reportable. So I think if you follow their suggestion here for tracking and reporting on recommendations and reactions, that should do it for you. I haven't played with that yet, so unfortunately I can't add that to my demo today.
Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Okay. So can you access custom metadata directly in the next best action, or you need Apex class?
Next best action needs, well, so there's kind of two things going on there. There's the data and the metadata, and definitely if you're trying to access the metadata, then you're going to need Apex for sure. And I should point out that, oops, sorry. Let's get a new strategy going. I should point out that new strategies are always oriented towards a specific object.
Mm-hmm.
So if I wanted to put one on the account object, they're very object-centered. They go on object pages, data record pages, and they really only know about the recommendation. The strategy doesn't know about anything else other than Apex. So you can load recommendations or you can generate recommendations using Apex. You have an option to create a new connection to Apex. So the new connection can surface data that you can use anywhere in your strategy for building a recommendation, or it can be directly generating a recommendation itself from Apex, or it can be enhancing a recommendation that exists in the database. So generate is for those dynamic in-memory recommendations that never get written to the database, and enhance is for those recommendations that live in the database and or in memory. It could be either. Basically gives you a second layer of manipulation of the data. But strategy is just connected to recommendations and Apex.
Okay, thank you. And no, there are no more questions. So let me check the Trailblazer community. No. Guys, if you have any questions, you can ask. I'm watching here, so utilize this time and ask your questions.
I mentioned before that it's a little bit testable, so you do have this inspector that lets you insert an ID and save and run what you're trying to build as far as your strategy. And for example, if I go to manager and I think I have, let's go ahead and connect a test. Just to see how this works. If I were to run this, I should be able to get information from my API, even though I haven't even put any elements here yet, because I haven't decided how to use this data yet. And it all comes back as JSON. That's JavaScript object notation. So we've got our JSON information here. And it looks like since we didn't have anything, it didn't really come back with anything. Probably want an account. Let me see.
And Bhavna says, okay, no question, just a comment, really cool demo. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bhavna.
And what other ways it provide to debug it? So I think it's debug log, correct? Apart from inspector.
For the strategy, mostly it's the inspector, and of course I'm having no luck here with getting my manager connecting to my trailhead for some reason. But let's try it with an enhance. So in some ways, being able to look here and see that my demo is not doing anything is debugging. I mean, this is a large part of debugging things. If there's Apex, definitely it's going to give you some interesting stuff in the logs around that, and the ability to control what information goes into that log. But for the strategy, I would suggest you start with the inspector for sure and see, because now, of course, I put the enhance instead of the manager, which when the manager connector wasn't hooked up to anything or wasn't being called or referenced anywhere, it wasn't actually happening. So then I put in the enhance element, and all of a sudden I'm getting my 4 animals from my Trailhead API.
Awesome. Let me check Trailblazer community one more time. Nope. Okay. Someone is asking, what is the difference between inspector and the test button?
Test button gives you the user's perspective of what's happening, and the inspector gives you the JSON payload. So it shows you more from a data perspective what's going on with the individual elements of the strategy, which is really helpful when you've got a complex strategy and the user experience doesn't turn out to be what you thought it would be. Getting in there and actually inspecting the JSON payload for the individual elements. In this case, one element, the only information is the output from that API call. If I were to add other elements, the branch or any other element would then generate a separate packet of or section of data here in the details section.
Awesome. We don't have any more questions. So if no one has any questions, we can end the webinar now. So I would like a moment to thank you, Bonnie. Thanks for presenting us, and thanks everyone to attending this. And with that said, I'm going to end the webinar, and have a great weekend.
Well, thank you, Rakesh, and thank you to everybody who attended on a Friday afternoon or morning or Saturday morning, I guess, for some people, perhaps.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you all so much.
Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.